When we talk about change management and how to handle this high changing, demanding time right now, we constantly shift to tools. What tools should we use? What's the best technique and framework to use? And I think there's a place and a time for frameworks and tools. That's how you organize change. That's how you make sure that you kind of communicate clearly to your team. What's the next steps? What are we missing? What's the hurdles we need to address right now? But when we're getting exhausted around too much change or these high demands to change, it's not about all the work that goes with change, all the process changes and shifts that you need to do. I think we're getting exhausted because we're operating in instability too long. And your human nervous system needs some stability. Now, I'm someone who actually likes to change. I embrace change. I like to be innovative. I like new. But I also feel in times unstable to all the change around me, because if process is changing, if people are changing, if all around us, the variables in place are shifting, I don't feel like I can predict what's next. I start to distrust people a little bit more. I feel a little bit more irritable. I have that overwhelming feeling when a quick ask is of me, and I used to be on it. I used to just pop out an answer, and now I just can't even think through it because I have decision fatigue. That overwhelming feeling that comes when you have too much change and your brain can't even organize it anymore. So here's some high change things that are happening that you might not recognize. When priorities are changing weekly. So you might set a priority as a team or a company initiative, or just what you're going to work on today. And then distractions come up, and then reroutes, and then a customer complaint. And then we have to change this over here because we found a gap in the system over there. And so priorities are changing weekly. So that to-do list that you worked out, that perfect puzzle that you put together, is now dismantled. The other thing that's happening is urgent requests from different directions. So your department might have set a priority. You might be working on some big initiative right now, or software change, or cleaning up your process. And then this department also has a priority, and this department has their priority. And they might demand something of you that is very low on your list, but high in their list. So urgent requests are coming in, again, distracting what you should be working on. The constant interruptions and pivots that you have to do throughout the day. It used to be you could get back to someone tomorrow, and now everything seems like an emergency. Hey, I pinged you on Teams 2 hours ago, and you have not responded. Maybe you're in a meeting, maybe you're in deep work, but we don't really allow that intentional space and time anymore. And I can usually tell when I go into a workforce energy management program, the teams that have been in constant change a little bit too long. They distrust process steps, new things, each other a little bit more, and they're not really thinking strategically. They can't think 5 steps forward and then we start planning for 4, 3, 2, 1 from there. They're kind of operating in survival mode. So today we're not going to be talking about change management models. Those are available out here. We're going to be talking more about the human patterns going on underneath that high change. So these behaviors are always running, but they are definitely spiking in high change, because human behavior, when you're backed into that corner, will do some behaviors in protection mode. So the first one we're going to talk about is overfunctioners. These are the people that are taking on too much. They're actually taking on too much so that they're making other people under-responsible and becoming the reliable one, which guess what? They are getting piled on then more because they're dependable, because they're getting things done. So do you see where they are almost being refed the overfunctioning? They will have struggled delegating out because they know if they do it, it's done right, it's done on time, it's done the right way. It's a safe mechanism to say, if I do it, then I know all these pieces are checked off. So they're going to struggle delegating it out. They're also going to be into that quiet burnout. And the quiet burnout is they take on more, they'll just get it done real quick, they'll take it on more, it will just be easier that way. And slowly, they don't know what's priority. They don't know the real value that they bring. And suddenly they're working long hours. They have that decision fatigue or brain fog, and everyone around them's just not pulling their weight. Now, if you felt that, that's the quiet burnout I'm talking about. It compounds. Burnout doesn't happen overnight. It's chronic stress. Now, aside from the over-functioning behavior you might see in high change, you're going to also see the withdrawers. Now, the withdrawers are the ones that used to participate and now they're a little bit more silent. They might be pulling back in communication, letting other people respond now and not even responding. They're just watching the emails go back and forth. They might seem more disengaged, not volunteering to take ownership of something that might be in their skill set area. They might be avoiding conflict or making the end decision. And again, this is that fine line between stepping up and stepping back. So maybe this is a time that they should step up and they're stepping back, or they're letting someone else take the load. They're being silent enough until someone else takes the load. And that's their way of protecting their energy, is disconnecting, is isolating. I'll see this a lot too in remote teams, where if you're not addressing some of these operational patterns of dysfunction in your team, that people will use remote work not for deep work, not for focus, not for flexibility, but for isolation. It's a way for them to disconnect from the dysfunction within their operations. So that's why when we talk about shifting patterns, not people, we're talking about process, people, systems. We're talking about the whole operational environment. So if the patterns are not over-functioning, if the patterns are not withdrawing, they're going to be controlling. These are our controllers, and they're micromanaging every piece, every task. They're hovering. They're copying me on that email. They're in meetings they shouldn't be. They have their hands in all the pots because they are looking for certainty. Again, we're talking about instability. So their system's actually looking for certainty. So they're going to be everywhere all at once so that they know the information, the details, the next steps, trying to control what they can control, which is often places they shouldn't be. And this can be very frustrating for everyone around them because people have their roles, responsibilities, the value and skill sets that they bring. And when you have these controllers in these teams, in these meetings, in your operation, micromanaging everything, it doesn't feel good to have people rework your items. It doesn't feel good to have people looking over your shoulder. It doesn't feel good when you're the person who can finally speak up in the meeting and make a decision, and this other person steps in, stepping on your toes, making the decision for you. And these people are pushing so hard because of the instability that it's going to come off making you feel incompetent, making you feel like you didn't bring the value that was successful, so now they have to step up. And so the controller behavior can be very toxic within teams in high change. Now, the fourth behavior you might be seeing in high change is the harmonizers, and they're avoiding difficult conversations because they're trying to keep the peace. They are going to be saying yes too often just so that they can avoid a rough discussion or a tough discussion between two people who don't want to take the responsibility, even though it's theirs. They want to basically keep the calm at the cost of themselves. And so they're actually carrying the emotional tension for the team. And as you can see, that's going to compound. It doesn't actually resolve the real problem, and it's going to start building internally for them until you feel like you're going to burst. So oftentimes I will see harmonizers as like the people pleasers, where they just want everyone to be happy and feel good after this meeting, so they'll take it on themselves. And you can see already where that's going to feed more burnout, and that's definitely not sustainable energy. Now, most leaders will try to address these four behavior patterns by visible behavior, by calling someone out in a meeting and saying, hey, Kelly, what do you think of that? But when you just talk about the visible behaviors going on, you're not addressing the underlying pattern of survivalship mode that's going on with these individuals and these teams. So the behavior will simply return when another stressful or high demand, high change event will come up. So when you can really look one layer deeper with the underlying patterns going on, you can start to address these root causes of why they're happening in the first place. For example, you can say, oh, my team's getting really burnt out. Well, it can be mislabeled as disengagement, but why are they getting burnt out? Is it because there's waste tasks on their plate? Is it because they're getting demands from 3 other departments? Is it because the team isn't functioning with one another for effective pass-offs? Is it because they're always in meetings and can't get work done? we'll label it as disengagement, but we didn't actually solve the problem. Or resistance, like someone not taking ownership of a task that probably should be theirs. They'll get mislabeled as negative or not a team player. But really, maybe what they're doing is protecting themselves because last year they took on the task and ended up with more and more and more and ended up in that role creep situation where now they're doing multiple people's functions just because of one yes in the beginning. So resistance often is mislabeled as negative or not a team player. Another one is exhaustion. My team's exhausted, or my high performer's exhausted, and now they have a poor attitude. So again, mislabeled that it's now a personality trait when really they're completely overtaxed. They're over capacity, and so they don't have room for patience and collaboration because they've been overloaded with other people's duties. So burnout, resistance, exhaustion, disengagement, negativity, poor attitudes, all these words are very surface level. It's very visual. And just because you labeled it doesn't mean that it's being changed in the underneath pattern. So there's a lot that goes into this, but let's take one of these patterns. Let's talk about misaligned departments. So this department wants to do this thing, and then this department thinks the priority should be this thing. So there's a lot of stress around the change right now that everyone has a little bit different expectation. So the stress is not in the change itself that's happening, the misaligned initiatives. It's in the conflicting expectations across departments. So again, if you go one layer deep, there's a pattern going on underneath that is driving the behaviors that you're seeing. So for example, I worked with a organization and their operations team wasn't getting along with sales. HR wasn't getting along with finance. So you had this disconnection between departments because HR was people focused. They had some people things to work on initiatives. Finance wanted to cut costs because they weren't having a good product and client year. On the other side, sales was promising the world and operations couldn't provide the world. So then sales was at operations' throat about not delivering quality products back to our customers, the only ones that pay the bills. So you have these, again, conflicting priorities and initiatives based on the department. So what they were seeing is quiet quitting. People were like slowly checking out months before they put in the resignation notice. Teams were defensive, that sales was at operations' throat because the customers are the only ones that pay our bills. We should bend over backwards for them. And operations are like, we can't provide custom everything to everyone. The people actually executing the work. So they were getting defensive, protecting their specific value that they bring to the organization. There was very territorial behavior, where assumptions were made and generalizations, but it was very protect my territory and I'm right, you're wrong type of mentalities. And that was feeding a lot of burnout and stress. It was feeding miscommunication and very high distrust. So they brought me in for workforce energy management program, focusing on conflict avoidance to healthy conflict. How do we have those conversations? Working on communication and building trust across departments. And what we found throughout the process is they were getting things done, but at a very mediocre level, like just enough to survive, which was putting them in survival mode because they were always catching up in response mode. So they weren't actually leading anything. They were just in response to the chaos going on in their operations. So they were compliant. They were a compliant team. They were getting what needs to be done. There is a difference between compliant teams and resilient teams. Resilient teams there's this chaotic, stressful situation, high change situation, and they bounce back. They have the tools to communicate. They have the trust to lean on one another. So there is a difference between compliant teams just getting things done and resilient teams that can bounce back from these events. So compliant team will say yes to everything. They're going to avoid pushing back to their customers or someone who is demanding something of them. They're going to be leaning heavily on the high performers because that's the people that can knock it out the fastest, disregarding their overcapacity. They're going to operate very much in that reactive mode. That if you said, what would you be doing by the end of the year? They couldn't really answer that. They just react to the market, the customers, the chaos of their operations. Whereas resilient teams, some of the characteristics that they have is they're speaking honestly about the tension in real time before it builds. So if sales puts in this request that they have this customer that wants this thing, operation has enough high trust and good communication with sales to say, if we do that, we can't satisfy this other customer. Or if we do that, we delay this shipment and this shipment and this shipment. So they have this back and forth conversation to still meet the same goal. And you can come up with new solutions or creative solutions out of that to still meet maybe the customer's needs. But you need to be speaking honestly about the challenges and hurdles that each department might have in that route. And in that, you can establish new priorities together to move forward. You can adapt together through these hurdles, and you can recover faster when you need to adapt. And that's where that psychological safety comes in, because psychological safety is not just about speaking about whatever you want to say. Psychological safety is feeling safe enough in an environment between people in your department, across departments, that you can speak honestly about what's going on. And it's still done in a respectful manner. And you are moving things forward because you're trying to work out a collaborative solution. So if you're like, hey, Kelly, what can I do to move my team from a compliant team to a resilient team? This is the framework that I would suggest. And it goes back to 3 C's of change. The 3 C's you can do to lead change, clean it up a little bit without all the chaos, is clarity. The first one is clarity. What matters most right now? Come to an alignment across departments on that. And I'm talking alignment. I'm not talking in this meeting, we all agree. And then when we get out of the meeting, you start doing the water cooler gossip and disagreeing and closed doors. Clarity means alignment across the board, in this room and out of this room. What matters most right now? The second one is capacity. Capacity means what is realistically sustainable right now. In my environment of manufacturing, we often set ourselves up for failure. We overcommitted. We overagreed to things that we couldn't do. So then we were scrambling, causing chaos not only in our operations, but catching up later on the things we should have been working on. So what is realistic and sustainable? That's number 2, capacity. Number 3 is consistency. If what matters most right now is agreed upon in this meeting, and we're also going to agree upon it behind closed doors, how are you going to align your message around that? Is that consistent? Because if you say, yes, I agree to that, but then during a team meeting, you're not talking about the number 1 priority we all just agreed upon, you're not consistent in your messaging. You're saying, yes, we'll work on that, but you're not really talking about it in every department meeting, in every one-on-one, right? It should be at the forefront every single time you're communicating, if that's what matters most right now. So between clarity, capacity, and consistency, you can lead through constant change without all that instability. Because people don't burn out because change is happening. Change has been here. Change will always be. It's just in a high demand era right now. They burn out because instability becomes our operating environment, putting us in survival mode, putting us in reaction mode. So if we want healthier, more resilient, agile teams, we can't just be focused on performance metrics and KPIs. Those are great, but we also need to pay attention to the patterns that are happening underneath. Do you have overfunctioners, withdrawers, controllers, or harmonizers in your group that you need to start addressing the behaviors underneath, feeding the instability? When you shift the patterns underneath, not all the people, you can lead differently in a more sustainable way while avoiding burnout.